I still remember the exact moment I realized my last name wasn't just a name. It was a warning. I was standing in the snow outside a burned-out farmhouse in rural Montana, holding a stack of letters that proved my entire bloodline had been hiding something since 1876. And when I finally understood what the Donnelly family secret really was, I had two choices: expose it and destroy what little family I had left, or protect it and let the truth die with me. Tell me honestly, if you found out your own family was at the center of America's most disturbing genetic mystery, would you tell the world? Or would you bury it to protect the people you love? Because that's exactly what I had to decide. I didn't grow up thinking my family was special. If anything, I thought we were painfully ordinary. We lived on the outskirts of a small Montana town that most people couldn't even find on a map. Winters were brutal, summers were short, and the Donnelly name carried a quiet kind of weight. People didn't gossip about us openly. They just kept their distance. As a kid, I thought it was because we were poor. We lived in an old farmhouse that had been passed down for generations, creaking floors, drafty windows, and a barn that looked like it might collapse any minute. My dad used to say, "This land is in our blood." I didn't realize how literal that statement might have been. The story, as it was told to me growing up, started in 1876. According to family lore, our ancestor, Patrick Donnelly, arrived in Montana Territory with nothing but a wagon, his wife Eleanor, and a newborn son. It was the era of gold rush dreams and lawless towns. Patrick was supposedly a trapper and part-time medic, someone who knew things about the body. That was how my grandmother would phrase it. She'd say it with a strange pride, like knowledge itself was dangerous. But there was always one part of the story she skipped. Whenever I asked why the Donnellys never seemed to marry outsiders, why every branch of our family tree looped back into itself like a twisted knot, she would get quiet. "It's better this way," she'd whisper. "We keep our own safe." As a kid, I didn't question it. Small towns are full of cousins marrying cousins. It wasn't unheard of. But as I got older, I started noticing patterns. My uncle had 6 fingers on one hand. My sister was born with eyes so pale they looked almost silver. I had a heart murmur that doctors couldn't fully explain. And then there were the dreams. Every Donnelly I knew talked about them. The same recurring dream of standing in a field of white snow while something moved beneath the surface, like the earth itself was breathing. I thought it was superstition, shared trauma, genetic coincidence, until I went digging. It started after my father died. He collapsed in the barn one winter morning, and by the time we found him, the snow had already covered half his body. The official cause was cardiac arrest, but the coroner made a comment I'll never forget. He said, "I've never seen tissue quite like this. It's unusually dense." At the time, grief drowned out my curiosity. But months later, while sorting through my dad's old things, I found a locked wooden chest hidden beneath loose floorboards in his study. Inside were journals, dozens of them, leather-bound, dated back over a century. The earliest one I could read was from 1891, written in a cramped, frantic script. It mentioned the condition and the necessity of preservation. It described children born with the mark, a faint, spiral-shaped birthmark that appeared on the left shoulder blade. I froze when I read that. I have that mark. So does my sister. So did my father. The journals detailed experiments, not in some lab with white coats and beakers, but in barns and candle-lit bedrooms. Observations of growth rates, notes on resistance to illness, accounts of injuries that healed too quickly to be natural. At first, I thought it was the ramblings of uneducated pioneers trying to make sense of normal genetic disorders. But then I found the entry dated October 3, 1876. It described the first winter. Patrick wrote about a sickness that swept through nearby settlements. Entire families died within weeks. Fevers, blackened veins, delirium, but the Donnellys didn't. Not a single one of them fell ill. Patrick claimed it wasn't luck. He wrote that his wife Alina had been touched by something older than this land. He believed their survival wasn't natural immunity, it was inheritance. From that point on, the journals shifted in tone. They stopped reading like diaries and started reading like records: birth weights, bone density measurements, reaction times. It was as if my ancestors realized they were carrying something extraordinary, and instead of fearing it, they decided to cultivate it. And that's when I understood why we married within the family. They were trying to preserve whatever it was. The deeper I read, the more disturbing it became. There were accounts of outsiders marrying into the family and producing children without the mark. Those children were described as ordinary and fragile. In multiple entries, those children died young under vague circumstances: winter fever, barn accident, unfortunate fall. The pattern was too consistent to ignore. I started researching medical archives, newspaper records from late 19th century Montana. I found mentions of the Donnelly homestead, always in strange contexts. Reports of neighbors accusing the family of unnatural resilience. Rumors that Donnelly livestock rarely succumbed to disease. One article from 1902 described a barn fire that killed 3 farmhands, yet every Donnelly inside survived with minor burns. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe we just had a rare genetic mutation that enhanced certain biological traits, increased collagen production, faster clotting factors, something explainable. But then my sister got into a car accident. She should have died. The truck that hit her was doing 60 miles an hour. The car was totaled. The paramedics told me later they expected to find a body. Instead, she had a few broken ribs and a concussion. 2 weeks later, she was walking without pain. The doctors were baffled. One even asked if we'd participated in experimental gene therapy. That's when I decided to get tested. I contacted a geneticist out of state. I didn't tell my family. I sent in samples under a fake name. Weeks later, I got a call that changed everything. The doctor said my genome contained several anomalies, sequences that didn't match known human variations. They weren't alien, not something out of science fiction, but they were unprecedented. He asked if I had a history of inbreeding in my family. I hesitated, then admitted the truth. He said very carefully that what I had might be a stable but highly unusual mutation cluster, one that enhanced cellular repair and immune response. But he also warned me, concentrated mutations, preserved over generations, can become unpredictable. And then he asked if anyone else in my family had experienced neurological symptoms. That's when I thought about the dreams, about my uncle's episodes where he'd stare at the wall for hours, unresponsive, about my grandmother hearing whispers at night, about my own moments of lost time when I'd realize hours had passed and I couldn't remember what I'd done. The journals mentioned it too. The price of preservation, one entry read. The mind strains under what the body endures. By the time I finished reading through all the journals, I was shaking. The Donnellys hadn't just stumbled upon a rare genetic trait. They had actively isolated themselves for over a century to refine it. They believed they were chosen, improved, closer to something more. And I was living proof of their success. But here's where it gets worse. In the final journal, written by my father just months before his death, he addressed me directly. He wrote that he knew I would find the chest eventually. That curiosity ran strong in our blood. He confirmed everything I'd pieced together. And then he added something I hadn't expected. He wrote that the mutation was becoming unstable. Children born in the last 2 generations were stronger, yes. They healed faster. They rarely got sick. But they also experienced increasing psychological disturbances, hallucinations, aggression. a detachment from empathy. He described a cousin who had to be sent away after harming livestock in a way that suggested he felt nothing. My father believed we were approaching a tipping point, that by trying to perfect ourselves, we had amplified something dangerous. And that's the situation I was in. I had proof that my family had spent 150 years selectively breeding for a genetic anomaly that made us stronger, but possibly less human. I had scientific data that could revolutionize medicine, or expose my entire bloodline to government scrutiny, experimentation, maybe even imprisonment. So before I tell you what I did next, I want you to pause and think. If you were me, holding evidence that your family carried a mutation that could change the world, but also prove generations of unethical isolation and possible crimes, would you go public? Or would you protect your own? Because I had to choose. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt like an accusation. I started noticing changes in myself. Small cuts sealing over within hours, bruises fading overnight, and the dreams were getting louder, no longer just snow and shifting earth, but whispers I could almost understand. My sister confronted me one night. She defound the open chest in my room. She'd read some of the journals. Instead of fear, her reaction was pride. "Do you realize what this means?" she said. "We're not broken, we're evolved." That word, evolved, terrified me. I showed her the genetic report, the warnings about instability. I told her about the neurological risks. She shrugged it off. "Every advancement has side effects," she said. "We can manage it." But could we? 2 days later, my uncle had a violent episode. He attacked a neighbor who had come by to check on him, claiming the man was rotting from the inside. It took 3 of us to restrain him. His strength was unreal. Afterward, he didn't remember any of it. That was my answer. I drove to the city the next morning and met with the geneticist in person. I handed over the journals, the family records, everything. I told him the truth, that this wasn't just about healing faster. It was about a century of deliberate genetic concentration. I expected him to look at me like I was a monster. Instead, he looked fascinated. He said this could change regenerative medicine forever, that if studied ethically, carefully, it might help millions. But he also agreed that the psychological instability had to be understood before anything else. Within months, researchers were discreetly contacting members of my extended family. Some agreed to participate, others accused me of betrayal. My sister stopped speaking to me entirely. Word spread through town. The Donnelly name, once whispered, became headline material. Government agencies got involved, but not in the way I'd feared. There were no black vans in the night, just contracts, NDAs, clinical trials. It was controlled, structured, transparent. The results were groundbreaking. Our mutation cluster was real. It enhanced tissue regeneration and immune response significantly. But it also correlated with increased activity in areas of the brain tied to aggression and dissociation. The instability my father feared was measurable. By exposing us, I may have saved future generations of my own family from pushing the mutation further into dangerous territory. Researchers are now working on therapies to stabilize the neurological effects while preserving the regenerative benefits. But the cost was personal. Half my relatives won't speak to me. My sister moved out of state. The farmhouse was sold to fund research participation. The Donnelly land, the place that held our secrets for 150 years, is no longer ours. Sometimes I stand on a hill overlooking town and wonder if I did the right thing. We're no longer a mystery. We're a case study. But here's what I've learned. Strength without balance becomes destruction. My ancestors thought they were perfecting humanity. In reality, they were narrowing it. They confused survival with superiority. If I had kept quiet, maybe we would have remained strong for another generation, maybe even 2. But eventually, the instability would have consumed us. So was I wrong for exposing my own bloodline? I don't think so. I think I chose evolution in the truest sense. Not isolation, not secrecy, but adaptation. If you were on my side, if you believe truth is worth the fallout, then like this video. If you think I betrayed my family, tell me why in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, where the line between loyalty and morality isn't so clear. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess below. I read every single one. I'll see you all in the next story.